Montana Territory. February of 1883, the wind howled down from the Bitterroot Range, cold enough to split skin and steal breath. Isaiah Teller spotted the wagon half buried in snow just off the main trail, where the trees thinned and the mountains crouched low and quiet. He pulled his horse to a stop, his eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his hat. The canvas was torn. Snow had drifted high against the wheels. No smoke, no prints, no sign of life. Isaiah dismounted slow, one hand resting on the butt of his colt. He stepped through the snow, boots crunching loud in the silence. He pulled back the canvas flap. She was inside, curled under a threadbare quilt with snow dusting her hair. Her lips were cracked, her cheeks hollow, but her eyes opened. Wide, alert, she did not flinch. "You alone?" Isaiah asked. The woman nodded once. "Name?" "Faye," she rasped. "Faye Kerrigan. How long you been in here? Since the first snow?" Isaiah stared at her. "That was November." Faye's eyes fluttered closed. "I know." He brought her back to his homestead, a half-day's ride down the valley where the land opened wide and the river cut through the cottonwoods. It was not much, a one-room cabin and a lean-to barn, but it was warm, stocked, and safe. Faye did not speak much the first few days. She slept more than she ate, barely touched the stew he set in front of her. Isaiah let her be. He spoke only when needed, a habit he had long before she arrived, and worked the land while she healed. He watched her from the porch sometimes, sitting by the fire in his cabin, her eyes always on the window as if waiting for something that would never come. The third morning she asked, "Why did you stop for me?" Isaiah was chopping wood. He paused, rested the axe against the block. "Because no one should sleep in a wagon through winter and be left to die." Faye nodded, looked down at her hands. "I did not expect to wake up again." "You will now," Isaiah said. "You are safe here." It came out more certain than he felt. Still, she nodded like she believed it. By mid-March, the snow began to crack and groan, melting off the eaves and falling in heavy clumps from the trees. Faye had gained back some color, her steps firmer, voice steadier. She helped Isaiah feed the stock, patch the roof, even fixed his coffee when he forgot. One morning, she found him sitting on the porch with a small wooden box in his lap. He closed it quickly when she came out, but not before she saw what was inside: a small pair of leather shoes, worn nearly through at the toes. "Yours?" she asked gently. Isaiah hesitated, then shook his head. "My son's. Owen, he was 5, died of fever 3 winters ago." Faye sat down beside him. Her hand, pale and thin, settled on his forearm. "I had a daughter," she whispered. "Odette. She was 3, died last spring. My husband left before that." Could not stand the silence. Isaiah looked at her then. Really looked. Her eyes were wet but steady. She did not cry. He reached over and took her hand. They sat that way until the sun sank low and the wind picked up again. April brought the thaw. The river swelled and the trees budded. Isaiah watched Faye walk across the yard one morning with a basket full of eggs from the hens she had coaxed back into laying. Her hair was longer now, brushed smooth, and she wore one of his old shirts tied at the waist. "You are not planning to leave, are you?" he asked from where he leaned against the post. Faye blinked, surprised. "I had not thought about it." "I have." She tilted her head. And he swallowed. "I do not want you to." She walked to him, slow, set the basket on the porch rail. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," Isaiah said. Then, after a breath, "You are not afraid to work. You speak quiet, but you listen close. You lost everything, same as me, and you still got up every day. That is enough." Faye's voice was soft. "And what is it you want, Isaiah?" He looked at her, his jaw tight, eyes steady. "I want you here, with me. I want to wake up and see you by that stove. I want to hold your hand again like I did on that porch. I want to stop waiting for ghosts and start building something with someone real." Faye's eyes filled. She stepped closer. Then ask me. He did not hesitate. Will you sleep by my side, Faye? She reached up and touched his face, her thumb brushing his beard. Yes, Isaiah. I will. He kissed her, then not hurried, not unsure, just honest, like the wind shifting after a long, cold season. And inside the cabin, where the fire burned low and steady, two people who had survived more than most began again, not alone, not afraid, but together. The first time Faye planted something in the earth again, it was just onions. Nothing delicate, nothing stubborn. Just the kind of crop that didn't ask for much and gave back plain and honest. Her hands trembled a little against the early spring soil, and Isaiah didn't speak as he passed her the sack, just knelt beside her and dug out the next row. She glanced over once. I used to grow tomatoes, back in Kansas before the coughing took her. Isaiah pressed his palm into the dirt. They don't do too well up here, but beans take to this ground fine. She nodded and didn't speak again until the sun slid behind the ridge. By April's end, the fields behind the house showed rows of green pushing through. Faye kept to them each morning with a small hoe and a bucket of water from the creek. She worked with her sleeves rolled and her feet bare, and Isaiah found reasons to pass by more often than he needed. Your boots are by the door, he said one morning, watching her rinse her ankles in the trough. I know, she answered, dipping her toes once more, but I like to feel the ground. Reminds me it's real. He didn't argue, just left a folded cloth on the stoop for her feet and went to check the fence line. One evening, when the wind carried pine and damp earth through the open windows, Faye stood at the stove while Isaiah sat sharpening his drawknife. She stirred the pot slowly with one hand, her other resting against her hip. I've been thinking on something, she said, her eyes not leaving the stew. Isaiah set the blade down. Go on. There's a schoolhouse 2 valleys over, the one near Bear Creek. I passed it once, long before the cold came. He waited. They're short a teacher. I don't fancy going back to sewing for pennies, and I taught before Odette was born. I still remember my letters. He nodded once. You want to ride out there? I want to ask if they'll have me. I'd still come back every night. Isaiah stood, wiping his hands on a rag. You don't need to ask permission. I wasn't, she said, turning toward him. I just thought you ought to know where I'll be when I'm not here. He crossed the room slow, stopped in front of her. You think I'm the type to keep someone from what sets them right? No, she said, voice soft. I think you're the kind that remembers what it's like to lose direction. He reached for her then, hand slipping behind her neck, thumb brushing the edge of her jaw. If it brings you peace, I'll ride with you. She leaned into him, her forehead settling against his chest. Then we'll go at first light. The next morning, they rode side by side across the narrow pass, hooves moving quiet over thawed earth and moss. The trail curved through birch and spruce, and Faye's hat tugged low over her brow. She didn't speak until the schoolhouse came into view, a squat white building with a stovepipe and 2 shuttered windows. I don't expect them to remember me, she said, pulling her mare to a halt, but I hope they will. They will, Isaiah said. You've got a way of leaving a mark. She dismounted, dusted her skirt, and walked toward the door with her back straight. Isaiah waited by the hitching post, watching the wind catch the hem of her dress. A hawk circled overhead, its shadow gliding over the field beyond. He didn't look away until the door opened again and Faye stepped out, a folded paper in her hand. They want me, she said, smiling for the first time in weeks. And I start Monday. Isaiah took her hand as she mounted again. Then I'll ride with you till the snow says otherwise. She squeezed his fingers and they turned back toward home, the trail behind them soft and green with spring. By late May, the cottonwoods along the river had leafed out, casting dappled light across the yard. Faye came home dusty each evening, Her voice touched with fatigue, but her eyes bright in the way of someone steadily reclaiming themselves. Isaiah had taken to meeting her near the bend in the trail where the creek dipped low and the grass grew tall. He'd wait with the horses watered and a tin of coffee warmed on the flame he built beneath the rocks. She never asked him to, and he never asked why she smiled the way she did when she saw him there. One afternoon, rain threatened from the west, clouds heavy and low. Faye stepped from the cabin after changing out of her work dress, her hair still damp from the basin. She carried a small crate tucked under one arm. "I found some things in the back of the schoolhouse," she said, setting it on the porch rail. "Old readers' slates, a few broken nibs. I thought maybe we could mend some of it." Isaiah thumbed through the contents. "I can sand the splinters off these boards. You reckon the children'll sit still long enough to use 'em?" "They try," she said, settling onto the porch step. "There's a boy, Simon. He came in barefoot the first week, wouldn't speak. Now he mouths the words when I read. Never out loud, but I see his lips moving." Isaiah crouched beside her, his hands already sorting the pieces by size. "You're changing things over there." She looked out toward the distant ridge. "Feels more like I'm remembering how to be useful." "You've always been useful," he said. "Now you're just doing it for more than me." Faye traced the edge of her skirt, the fabric worn soft where her hands often rested. "Sometimes I wonder if it's all right to keep going forward like this. Like we're letting go of more than we meant to." Isaiah didn't speak right away. A bird called low from the trees. "I think letting go don't mean forgetting," he said finally. "It just means you've carried it far enough." Faye turned to him. "You say things like that, and it feels like the ground settles under me." He reached over, brushing a curl from her cheek. "That's how I feel when you come home." Later that week, the schoolhouse bell cracked, weathered through from a storm long past. Faye brought it home wrapped in burlap, the clapper rusted clean off. "I thought it might be good for the barn," she said, laying it on the workbench. Isaiah turned it over in his hands. "We could hang it by the hayloft. Use it when the coyotes come close." She laughed then, not polite or quiet, but full. It startled a pair of doves from the eave. "I don't want to forget how that sounds," he said, watching her. Faye leaned across the bench, her hand resting on his. "Then don't." He kissed her for the second time that spring. This one unhurried, with her hands still dusty and his shirt catching a sliver of wood from the edge of the table. Neither of them stepped back right away. That night, she made biscuits in the hearth oven, flour dusting her elbows. Isaiah carved a handle for the broken school slate. They didn't speak much, but the space between them felt full of tools and warmth and the quiet knowledge of belonging. And when they lay down, her head found the place beneath his collarbone that seemed made for it. He ran his hand along her back, slow and steady. "I'm not waiting for anything anymore," she said into the hush. "You don't have to," he answered. Outside, the wind moved through the grass, bending it low and letting it rise again. The house held firm around them. The wheatgrass had come in thick along the western slope, and Isaiah spent most of June cutting it down with his scythe, binding it into bundles before the sun got too high. He'd watch the sky more often now, not for weather, but because the days had grown quiet in a different way. Faye wasn't due back from the schoolhouse until near dusk, and though her absence wasn't heavy, it was noticeable in the way he moved slower through the cabin, as if saving things for her. That Thursday, she came home with a strip of lace tucked into her coat pocket and a small splinter along the inside of her palm. "There's a girl named Clara who likes to sew during arithmetic," she said, pulling the thread free from her skin. "She slipped me this and said I should wear it in my hair sometime, said it might make me look less tired." Isaiah tilted his head. "You don't look tired." She met his gaze, the corner of her mouth tipping. "I think she meant it kindly." He stepped forward, took the lace from her fingers. If you ever put it on, do it for yourself, not for someone else's notion of what you ought to look like. That's a fine thing to say, Isaiah, tell her. He handed it back. I meant it. The next morning, he left before sunrise to help a neighbor re-roof his porch. The man, Emery, had lost his leg in the war and worked slower than he let on. They spent the better part of the day prying up warped shingles, Isaiah steady on the rafters while Emery passed tools up from a stool. "You still living alone?" Emery asked, squinting up. "No," Isaiah said, fitting a nail between his teeth. "Not for some time now, figured," Emery grunted. "You've got a different look about you, less like a man waiting for something that ain't coming." Isaiah hammered the nail in without answering. When he returned home, he found the barn doors open and the chickens let out across the yard. Faye stood beside the trough, sleeves rolled, hauling water from the well with both hands. "You're back late," she said, not turning. "Had my hands full." She wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist. "I fixed the hinge on the root cellar. It wasn't closing right." He stepped closer. "You didn't have to, I know," she said, meeting his eyes. "But I live here." Later, after dinner, they sat outside with their boots off, the porch boards warm under their feet. Faye held a book across her knees, one Isaiah didn't recognize. "Clara's father brought it down from Helena," she said. "It's about a woman who drove a team of horses through a blizzard to deliver medicine." "True story?" "I hope so." He leaned back, arms crossed. "You ever drive a team?" "Only once. Broke a wheel halfway to the next town and had to walk back." "That was before everything with Odette." He looked at her, then down at her bare feet. "You ever think you'd be here like this?" "No," she said, "but I don't feel lost anymore." The next day she rode to the schoolhouse before first light to help prepare for the midsummer gathering. Every family from across the valley would bring something: stew pots, quilts, fiddle songs. When Isaiah arrived that evening, the yard was already full of wagons and voices. Faye stood near the steps, her dress pressed and her hair tied back with the lace Clara had given her. She saw him and lifted her hand, not a wave, just a quiet reaching gesture. "You clean up all right," he said as he approached. "I almost forgot how to," she replied, but Clara insisted. They ate beside the fire pit, sharing a tin plate between them. Faye introduced him to the older children who helped her clean the classroom, and Isaiah nodded his way through conversations he didn't much care for, only half listening. Later, as the sky darkened and someone took up a fiddle, Faye leaned into him. "I'd like to build a coop closer to the cabin," she said. "The hens don't like the draft in the barn," he nodded. "We can start tomorrow. And maybe a bench for the porch. The stump's too low." "I'll cut the boards tonight." She looked up at him, eyes steady. "We're making a life here." Isaiah didn't answer right away. He took her hand, rough with work and clean of any pretense, and brought it to his chest. "We already have." The first frost of autumn came early that year, thin and silvery across the pasture grass. Isaiah rose before dawn, wrapped in his wool coat, and stepped out to check the roofline for leaks along the eaves. Faye had left her boots by the door, damp from the riverbank where she'd hauled the last of the summer wash the evening before. He placed them beside the hearth to dry before she stirred. When the sun broke over the far ridge, she came outside with a biscuit in one hand, her braid tied with a strip of blue gingham cloth. She leaned against the post beside him, chewing slow. "You think it'll be a hard winter?" Isaiah watched the sky. "Snow's coming sooner than it ought to. Could be deep." She nodded. "We'll need to cut more wood." "I'll take the north stand this week. Oaks are ready." He glanced at her. "You still planning to ride out to the school after freeze?" "They'll keep the doors open through December," she said. "Then the children stay home till spring. I'll be back before nightfall each day, but I won't ride through a storm." He didn't question it, hadn't needed to for a long while now. That evening she brought out a tin box she'd kept tucked in a high cupboard, narrow spools of thread, a bone-handled needle, and a folded square of muslin. She spread it on the table and began to stitch, careful and quiet. Isaiah sat across from her, carving notches into the new porch bench. "What are you making?" She didn't look up. "A map," his brows lifted. "Of what?" "Of here. The land, the river, the ridge to the west. I want to stitch our place into something I can hold." He nodded and kept working, the knife moving slow through the pine. The next week, a message arrived by courier from the county clerk in Missoula. Isaiah returned from the barn with the envelope folded in his coat pocket and handed it to her without a word. She opened it with care, eyes scanning the cursive. "They've granted the claim," she said, breath catching. "The land's ours, together." Isaiah folded his arms. "Didn't figure they'd argue it, not with the improvements and the school in your name." She stepped toward him, hands still holding the paper. "It's not just about ownership, Isaiah. It's about choosing to build something that can't be taken." He laid his hand over hers. "Then we've built right." The days shortened. Smoke lingered low in the valley, and each morning they woke to a cabin warm from embers banked with practice. Faye began gathering dried herbs from the shelves she'd lined in summer yarrow, mullein, horehound, mixing them into cloth sachets and storing them in cedar boxes. One evening, as she stitched the final edge of her map, Isaiah unlatched the top drawer of his work table and drew out a small carved box. He placed it before her and waited. She opened it, eyes settling on the ring inside plain silver, engraved with a narrow band of mountain ridges etched by hand. He spoke low. "I made it from my mother's brooch. She'd want it used for something lasting." Faye touched the ring but didn't lift it. "You sure you want to tie yourself to someone who's already weathered so much?" "I want someone who knows how to stand through storms," he said. "I want you." She slid the ring on her finger, the silver snug against her skin. "Then you have me." That night they sat by the hearth with the map between them, the stitched lines of river and ridge gleaming faintly in the firelight. Faye leaned into his side, one hand resting on his knee. "I never thought I'd be warm again," she said, voice quiet. Isaiah kissed her temple. "You're home now." They married the following week. No preacher, no paper, just Faye's hand in Isaiah's, the river behind them, and the land bearing witness. Clara brought wildflowers in a tin pail. Emery came with his fiddle. The children from the schoolhouse stood in a line, shy but beaming, and sang a hymn they'd practiced in secret. Faye wore a dress she'd sewn from unbleached muslin. Isaiah wore his Sunday shirt, collar freshly pressed. They exchanged vows beneath the cottonwoods, and when the final words were spoken, Faye reached up and kissed him with both hands pressed to his face. They danced once under the open sky, the firelight catching the curve of her smile. Then the guests drifted home, and the couple walked back to the cabin hand in hand, the quiet settling around them like wool. That winter, they kept the hearth burning and the hens fed. Isaiah carved a cradle from scrap pine, though no child had yet come. Faye kept teaching until the snow sealed the trail, then spent the season mending boots and writing down lessons for spring. They never spoke of what they'd lost. There was no need. They lived in the present, rooted deep, each day a quiet testament to what they had chosen to build. And when the thaw came, it came gently. One morning in early March, Faye stepped out into the pale sunlight with Isaiah behind her, his hand resting against the small of her back. The wind had turned warm. The first bird sang low from the spruce. Faye lifted her face to the sky. "We made it." Isaiah kissed the crown of her head. "And we'll keep making it, together." They stayed that way for a long while, two people, side by side, with nothing left to run from and everything still to grow. and the land held them steady as it always had beneath the wide Montana sky.